Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, again. So we are now going for our first keynote in this Filmmaker. So I would first of all like to thank Catherine David for being with us, and I would also like to thank João Cardoso, that most of you do not know, but is from Lusófona in Porto, in the north of Portugal, and we were just talking that we need to bring you more on board of FilmU, but João is responsible for preparing and organizing and helping us, not only in having Catherine David, but also the Sarah Driver with us in this summit. So thank you very much, João, for that. And I'll now give the floor to João to do the introduction of the session.
Thank you, Manuel José. Put my tea here. So hello, everybody. Thank you, Manuel José Damasio, for making this possible, and thank you, Catherine David, for being with us. I will make a short introduction in my broken English. Catherine David is a French art historian, curator, and museum director. She studied linguistics, literature, and history of art at the Université de la Sorbonne and the École du Louvre in Paris. From 1982 to 1990, Catherine David was curator at the Musée National d'Art Moderne, Centre Georges Pompidou, and from 90 to 94, curator at the Galerie Nationale du Jeu de Paume, also in Paris. From 94 to 97, Catherine David served as artistic director for Documenta 10 in Kassel, Germany, that took place in 97. Catherine David was the first woman and the first non-German speaker to curate Documenta. From 1998, she has been director of the long-term project Contemporary Arab Representations, which began at Fundación Antoni Tàpies in Barcelona. Between 2002 and 2004, she was director of the Avita David Center of Contemporary Art in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. Catherine David was curator of many collective shows and solo exhibitions of artists, including Stan Douglas, Jeff Wall, and Chantal Ackerman, among others. She was also the curator of the film and video program of the 24th Bienal of São Paulo in 1999. In Portugal, Catherine David curated with João Fernandes the exhibition Fora, Out, of the Portuguese filmmaker Pedro Costa and the Portuguese sculptor Rui Chaves at the Museum of Serralves in Porto in 2007. Catherine David was, until 2020, Deputy Director of Centre Georges Pompidou in Paris. Of the Museum of the Museum of National Art, Centre Georges Pompidou. Thank you, Catherine David, for being with us.
So, thank you very much. Thank you very much, John, for the invitation, and thanks to the university and the festival. So I will go on in broken English because I never pretended speaking perfectly English, and I always said I don't think in English. I can express myself, but I'm not sure I'm thinking. So what you will hear is a kind of wild translation from my French. And so I'm trying to answer to a very simple and at the same time very complicated question, which is the relationship of film and art, knowing that the question is much larger, longer and complicated than that, because it's about the long history of images, non-painted images, and of course beginning with photography, going through still images and after moving images, and the very long and complicated history of these forms with museums and art first and museum after. Art is always coming first and museums after. So in the second part of my presentation, I will concentrate on, and I'm trying to be precise, filmmakers installations, so meaning installations, decided, organized by filmmakers who are in a specific context and in a kind of a specific moment, deciding to show certain elements of films in a situation, a three-dimensional situation, or a multi-screen situation, which is not necessarily the core of their practice. And there are not so many. And I will speak about projects I know because I worked close to the filmmakers. So I'm mentioning them by chronological order. One is Chantal Ackerman. We produced at Jeu de Paume with Walker Art Center Minneapolis, the Death from the East installation, the film first and the installation. And I consider, and I don't think I'm the only one, that it was the first and probably the most ambitious installation by Chantal Ackerman, meaning that it was really like putting her hands into the body of the film and trying to extend it, to expose it in a three-dimensional space, and trying to have people, instead of having a frontal situation, which is the one of the défilement du film, when you are looking at a movie, trying to have people entering into the movie. So working on the very different editing of the images, working on the sound, and you had this very, very amazing and very moving end, jazz sound, and which was like a memory of what happened in the camps, concentration camps. So I think it was a very, very important project for her and for the Jeu de Paume as well. Second one will be Hans-Jürgen Sieberberg, who did for Documenta a very ambitious, and I think it was his first presence in a museum as a filmmaker working on an installation. It was the Cave of Memory, a very complex, not so complex, but huge installation. He worked out of his very, very big archive, and especially for this project, the archive on a major post-war Austrian figure who was the amazing actor Oskar Werner. And Sieberberg was a very, very, very admirative of Oskar Werner, and he worked on this, on his biography, on his life, as in a way, a possible, not a symbol, but a possible biography of one side of the Austrian history during the war and after. Oskar Werner was born in the 30s, but he was very active and visible after the end of the war. And you know, Oskar Werner being very famous for being very wide, very difficult, but a major theater actor, is unfortunately very well known. Unfortunately, not because the film was bad. Gilles et Jim is a very, very strong movie by François Truffaut, but he was very, very well known for this film when his whole theatrical career is immense, and he died in a situation Sieberberg and many people found very, very sad. He died destroyed by alcohol and despair in a way. And all this kind of biography was restituted in different sequences. Sieberberg organized out of the archive, out of documents taken from Oskar Werner archive and Oskar Werner films. And the last one will be, I worked with other filmmakers, but if not, we would spend the whole and have a short time. The last one will be Pedro Costa, because in a way, when we are looking at new installations he's producing, we're always laughing a little bit, because he's always telling me, if you don't find it nice, it is your fault, because it was the first time when I was at Avita David, I invited him, and I didn't push, I'm not a pusher, I'm not a person pushing the artist, I'm proposing, questioning. And when I saw the O Quarto da Wanda, I found the movie absolutely, it was a very, very strong impact. And after knowing him, I understood that you had many, many hours of rushes, Quarto da Wanda being more or less 3 hours, and the rushes were more or less 100 hours. And so discussing with him on the making of the film, the situations, the long-term project, in a way, I told him that it was really, for me, a question for, not just for him, but for this kind of film, which is close to a life project, a political experience, an aesthetical experience, that all these rushes lost, or not lost, frozen somewhere. And I began to think, and we ended with the first presentation, the first installation, very modest, very precise in Avita David, which were 2 screens with, on the left side, elements or images, rushes from the inside situations in Quarto da Venda, meaning au Quarto da Venda, meaning in the houses, and the other with the outside. So, you know, this all the sequences in this very, very labyrinthic, small, not even streets, I don't know in English how you say ruelle, but you know, this very, very small ruelle of fontainas. So first of all, I think that it's quite important, even if we don't have the time to redo the whole history, to be very conscious about the long story of, you know, many things happened before the moment when filmmakers entered into the museum and into this kind of other possible visibility. And the question is more today, especially in this context, to begin to think about the history of what we could call the presence of moving images in museums and exhibition spaces from, and problem is beginning there, from when? So I would say, maybe some people would say differently, but I would say from what I know from all the exhibitions I did and many artists I had the privilege to work with, from the late 50s on, late 50s and 60s. So this is really the moment of the dispositives. So I'm not sure we can speak about films, but really visual dispositives, artists who are very keen about the whole history of independent cinema, underground cinema, but also the old cinema, and who are beginning to discuss, to analyze, to deconstruct the vision dispositive. And in this, you have many others, and of course, I don't have so many artists from non-American or European contexts, but you have some, and we have to be very attentive to them. But at this time, I was working with these people. So I would mention a few: Peter Campus, Michael Snow, Dan Graham. A little bit later, but I think they still belong to this kind of, not tradition, but how to that? This way of working, this kind of questioning, artists like Thierry Kunzel, because Thierry died very young. So we always think, but you know, today he would be as old as James Coleman. So I would mention Thierry Kunzel, James Coleman, and coming more or less at the moment, experimental video, so we are not with films yet, video, and a video which is very often a video dealing with performance, and film installations, properly said, begins a little bit later, the late 70s, and here you could include, of course, a Portuguese artist, and I know that this part of his work is not the best known because part of it has been destroyed, part of it has been very rarely shown, which is the installation and photographic and filmic work by Julian Sarmiento. But I would mention again here Thierry Kunzel, James Coleman, and later, a little bit later, Gary Hill or Bill Viola. So this is really, you know, what is inside. And now we come into another moment, which is really the entering into the museum of filmmakers working on their own films. They decide to reinstall, rearticulate, and temporarily, in a specific moment, translate into another object. And of course, what I'm telling you here is not something I took out of my hat or under the shower. It's coming from a certain number of exhibitions and projects I worked on. And one I think has been very, very important for us, of course, but also for a certain audience and eventually a generation, which was Passage de l'Image, which was shown at Centre Pompidou in 1990. And we began to work 87. And at the time, you know, the idea was to deal with the circulation of still and moving images into the art, and after, of course, into the museums. For what reasons, what ways, how it was working, and we had very what you could say classical photographers working with analogical. You know, at the time, of course, you already had what is the name again, Jean? But it's not. Digital. You had the beginning of a digital images, but we had Robert Adams, very important in this exhibition, but already, you know, Marcelo Denbach and Michael Snow again, James Coleman. Dan Graham wasn't there. I realized yesterday, checking the catalogue, he wasn't there. Chantal Ackermann, for the first time, we had Chantal Ackermann, much before the Jeu de Paume installation, and she was only showing Hotel Monterey in monitor, and she had a kind of re-editing of Hotel Monterey. But I would say that the artist, the filmmaker, was really emblematic in this exhibition because he's like, in a way, the grandfather, the one who really began to discuss all these issues in a very, very visionary way. And he was a filmmaker in the beginning. He's a filmmaker. Was Chris Marker. And so one thing I should have mentioned earlier. I have no images because the paradox of this whole story is that when you are working with this kind of works before the 2000, you have no images. You know, I checked in Pompidou, we have very, very few archives from the exhibition as such. We have very few archives of the piece by Dennis Adams, which was showing the different sequences of movies we had selected and so on and so forth. And even now, I think that it's a little bit of a trick, you know, to make us believe that you see because you see that you don't see in a way, because it's very difficult to restitute into one still image, photography, what's happening in an installation. And even in Pompidou, the recent one, the exhibition with Pedro Costa, Rui Chafes, and Paulo Nozzolino, it was in the dark, and I can tell you that the images are very, very difficult to understand. The interpretation is very difficult when you didn't experiment the space, as it were. So, you know, it's really like, it's not an excuse, but it's a very complicated story. So, Passage de l'image, from the people I wanted to discuss, Chantal Ackermann, a very sober re-editing of a piece. Document at Cassel, Hans-Jürgen Zieberberg with the Cave of Memory, which was a huge, not a corridor, but a rectangular room with different spots. It was like a Via Crucis, and it's something which came out when I discussed with him, because he had this kind of, let's say, painful memory of Oscar Werner, and I think it was very well restituted into the installation. I think that, you know, I think it's something maybe I shouldn't, but I want to discuss this kind of issue. You know, it was a time when we had some problem already, politically correct people protesting that Mrs. David, you can't show Zieberberg, it's a fascistic artist, and said, what? What? Fascistic artist? The filmmaker of Hitler, a movie from Germany? What are you speaking about? You know, so it was already an issue, and I think Oscar Werner is precisely a very, very, you know, for me, the Oscar Werner, the Cave of Memory, Oscar Werner, because after it was the first iteration of Cave of Memory, because later, in 2000, in Beaubourg, I didn't see that because at that time I was in Abu Dhabi, but in 2000, he's shown in Beaubourg a Cave of Memory around it was the same process, but the theme was the house, the family house in Prussia of his family. And so I think it was very, very important, you know, to really make people understand that Oscar Werner is the opposite of a fascistic memory. You know, intelligence, education, very, very deep idea of what an artist is, could, and should be, and nothing to do with the so-called fascistic program. I'm closing the parentheses. And of course, we shown, and of course, we had no problem, and everybody was absolutely enthusiastic when Zieberberg came and gave a wonderful talk during the 100 days we had each day, speaker or filmmaker or performer. We had also in the documented something I want to insist, because you know this work probably much better than the other ones. Jean-Luc Godard, we shown for the first time for a museum exhibition audience, Histoire du cinéma, Histories of Cinema. And Jean was asking me, how did you show it? You know, the idea on the beginning was to have the Histoire du Cinéma like rhythming the documenta. So having I don't remember if it's 7 or 8 episodes, following up the historical parcours of documenta. And Gaumont was so nasty in the negotiation that we ended with no films. And at the very last moment, a friend of mine who knew Godard called him, and Godard said, "Oh, but if this lady wants my film, of course she can have the film. It's not for Cannes. Of course, I'm absolutely happy if my films are shown in an exhibition context." So we ended with the films and question, where do we show it? And the idea, and I think it worked quite well, was to have the films installed in Dan Graham Pavilion. So instead of having Dan's filming of some of his pavilions in Munich, beautiful garden or parks, we had the Godard, and it worked very well. And I think it was always full of young people staying the full day for looking at the Histoire du Cinéma. So, it was another way. But in that case, for me, it's not an installation. And it's not even a curator installation. It was just finding the best spot in the economy of the parcours of the documenta, of the exhibition, for this very specific work, which was, of course, echoing to many questions we were raising in this documenta about history, before and after 45, for instance. And don't be afraid now, it won't go like that because I didn't do hundreds of exhibition. One was also Standardinger, the State of Things in Berlin, Kunstwerk in 2010, when we were discussing again the documentary potential of still and moving images. And of course here you had the younger generation invited. It was the first time Walid Rad was invited in Europe, and Walid I knew early in Beirut. And we, so now I would like to, we spoke about the Chantal Ackermann, Death au bord de la fiction I mentioned, and maybe we go more on, we stay more because you know the work and you can probably understand better what are the challenges and how it's working now. The Pedro Costa, not the Pedro Costa case, because Pedro Costa is first of all a filmmaker and sometimes is deciding to work on an installation. What's happening these days, and for Pedro Costa probably also, but in a more problematical forms with a certain number of filmmakers, is that from the 90s on, and it's something I saw and I discussed with Chantal Ackermann, a certain number of filmmakers, especially independent filmmakers, they were a little bit, or they felt a little bit disappointed, or they were considering, maybe for good reasons, that they were not considered enough, that it was easier in the field of visual arts, after the big hysteria of the 80s. It was booming, and you had a lot of agitation and a lot of money going on and a lot of visibility. So it was something really pushing a certain number of filmmakers into the museum space, and not always for the best, because I think I have nothing against filmmakers installing films, but it has to be meaningful, it has to be necessary, and it has not to be like a kind of detour in order to get, which happened many times, funding and attention and so on and so forth. So again, the first iteration, I tried to describe these two very sober screens with inside and outside situations of Vanda is one way, and after it became more complex with the installations you saw in Porto, in Serralves, the exhibition Jean mentioned previously, with Rui Chafes, which in a way you had a few other venues in other museums. I didn't follow them all, so I can't comment things I didn't see. And again, I don't comment when I just saw images, because I know how tricky images can be. And the more recent iteration was the exhibition in Paris, in Centre Pompidou. Again, the exhibition with Paolo Nozzolino and Rui Chafes, where you had multi-screens installation, and really like a certain very specific elements taken out of the films and installed in situations which were absolutely different, because you would look very differently to human faces, portraits. You would look very differently to situations, this kind of very, very quiet moment in Pedro's film would, of course, look even more quiet, a little bit opaque, to a certain reel. And I think, of course, it was a very different project than the very early just re-editing, in a way, not too far from what Chantal did when she shown Hotel Monterrey, which is itself a kind of a dispositive into the movie. When you see the elevator with the door opening, closing, it's like a dispositive in the film. And now I think that the problem is that you have really like an invasion of moving images in, and it's something, it would be maybe the last, where am I with time? Because I didn't check and we were late, sorry. Okay, so come to, let's say, what would be the critical, and it's especially interesting for me because you see as many exhibitions I get than I do, and you see probably also different things, so it's quite interesting to compare and to discuss. What's happening is that you have really an invasion of moving images because it's seductive, because it's a more, it's supposed to be more enjoyable and better for the audience. I know that even in my museum, we had to fight a lot when we would like to show a modern painter, especially when he was not, or she was not well known. And, Catherine, you will have more audience with this videast, and so on and so forth. And the point is that we have to be a little bit attentive, and to be not to be so permissive, because what's happening these days is that there is a kind of video clip culture, and from my experience, what I learned from installations, what I learned from moving images in a museum or in an installation context, is precisely to be able to keep a minimum distance, to be able to stand, to be able to analyze, and not to be like immersed. And these days you have so many exhibitions or invitations coming into your email, or invitations that immersive exhibition. I don't want to be immersed. What is this, to be immersed and to be in a kind of permanent soup? I think it's a very, very first, it's not very enjoyable, at least for me, and second, I think it's very dangerous, and it's reminding me Serge Danet, because I'm also, it's my generation. I learned him a lot, and I had the privilege of knowing him and working with him, especially for Passage de l'Image, for one of the texts. One was by Serge Danet, the other one by Serge Deleuze, the people external to the museum team. And Serge Danet was saying, the problem now is that we are in a kind of circle, and a film, one image is when you cut into the circle, when you just design a specific moment or a specific space, and not this kind of permanent clip, And so this day, I think we have to be very, we should be more attentive. And there is also the issue that when and you enjoy cinema, so meaning from the very beginning up till now, you have different moments, but you see that there is no one moment when a good film or meaningful film, is a collection of dispositives, visual situations, specific articulations. I was thinking recently, I was looking recently, and it was a good aspect of COVID that we were at home and with many, many hours for looking at films and at films a lot, and reading quietly, but looking a lot to movies. I was looking at most, because they are at the time, now no, because they passed away, but you had most of the film by, for me, one of the most important Japanese, no, more than Japan, immense filmmaker, Kiju Yoshida, who is really, and you look at the film, and especially the early ones, the experimental, I think it's a wrong denomination, because for me, all Yoshida is experimental. He never stopped. The different moments, you have different moments in his filming. I won't say different styles, different moment, but it's always a way of discovering a certain world, a way of dealing with bodies, with missing bodies. I think one of the great apportation of Yoshida that is dealing with the missing ones, and in a very, very convincing way. But when you come to the very early, what people call the experimental, and again for me all but experimental cinema, when people say experimental Yoshida, it's Eros plus anarchy. It's a défilé of dispositives. Each 2 minutes you have a new dispositive, a new visual invention. And you know, this is really, and there's what I see often is that you have sometimes a trick or a very, sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's clever, 3 minutes, it's like a clip. And you know, but you say, my guy, a film is, it's not that, and this it's not really interesting. And what you see that you have a kind of too many easy, lazy, moving images which are like, how do that, invading the exhibition space, which are not all necessary, which is the least worst, I would say, when it's just not necessary. But sometimes it's even very problematical because it's a kind of a replication of the worst of contemporary images. You know, the clip style, the TV program style, and it's like, you know, it's like a pseudo-critical art, which is in fact one more layer of intoxication. So I think it's really when we, again, when that's why I wanted to insist on installations by filmmakers, which is not such, don't have so many. And even if sometimes you have some mistakes, we're all doing mistakes, thanks God. But, you know, to be very, I'm not necessarily interested in multiplicating the categories, but I think at least to be attentive to the project, to be attentive to the challenges, and not to be into this kind of yeah, again, the soup of moving images, you know, and beginning sometimes with the, I won't say, you know, people say going back. I'm not going back, I'm going with still images. You know, it's like when people are telling you, it's as if analogical images were from another time. They are not fully from another time. It's still possible, and you have a certain number of amazing photographers still using analogical image. And you know, the analogical image is really dealing with other things than the digital one. And again, when I would end with that because we're in Portugal, so I will end with Pedro Costa. You know, what I found extremely interesting and modest and ethical in many discussions we had on the kind of images, how his images changed from the early movies to Vanda and after, is a filmmaker. And he knows enough for understanding that when he's using the video camera, he has not the same depth in the image. He can't film the bodies the same way. And of course, he's working out his images, working out the rhythm out of that. So, you know, in that case, it's the images are probably from the very, very convincing ones and meaningful ones you have with the new digital cameras. So the point is not, again, to be the new technology is not good. Technology is technology. You know, the point is, what are you doing? And what kind of consciousness do you have when you are using that? And this said, again, you don't have, I think we should pay more attention to really meaningful project. And what I see, you know, these days, and I guess that you have many young or future filmmakers in the assistants, you know, it's when you have worked with really decent, meaningful filmmakers, I would say there is something also in the economy of the work, the time, the necessity of being able to find a minimum common ground with a certain number of people for a certain time, the necessity to, till a certain extent, invent a space, you know, and it's really something which is, time, of course, is implicated in the process. So I think that this is something which is not, of course, mentioned a lot these days because it's not at all fitting with the economy. And here, I'm not speaking about meaning economy, I'm speaking about money. It's not fitting with the economy we're living in and living with at the moment. But it's, I think, what has to be not saved, you know. I never thought I was an ambulance, so but that we have to be very careful and identify and being able to criticize. And to criticize is not that this is bad. This is a very, very common journalistic view and critique, you know, to trying to understand what people are doing, when they are doing well, and when they are doing wrong, and when they are doing dangerous, you know. And here I would finish not with Pedro Costa, but with Serge Danet. And, you know, I think it's probably in France at least, one of the lifetime we had a cinema critic who was also able to have an ethical and political stand, keeping a very cultural line. So, you know, I think it's where we are these days. So I would end here with, and of course you open to any critiques, comments, questions you would like to make.
Thank you very much. I have a question or a clarification, because you said something that is, you repeated more than once, that for the work to be relevant, it needs to respond to a certain need. What? It needs to respond to a certain need. You use the expression necessity often. And I would like to ask you if you see, because often when we discuss this topic, usually we tend to take a different approach, and we look at how, let's call it the spaces of art exhibition, whatever it's the museum or a gallery or whatever, expand the potential of the medium. And you have that expression of the expanded cinema and all that tradition that you did not mention at all in your short history.
I never really understood what it meant.
Yeah, what it means. It's a confusing concept. My question is, do you make kind of an equivalence between this necessity, the need that you've mentioned, and the political stand, or the let's call it the creation of a meaning that is specific to the site where the work is being shown? Is that what you understand this need to be? The move that takes the film, let's say, out of the theater into the filmmaker exploring the medium in a different site and in a different context, and that's where the need may arise.
I mean, I was not necessarily, because I think that, of course, the space is always, it's never indifferent, the space where you are showing installation, a painting or whatever. But I was more thinking about the necessity for the filmmaker, or that let's say, the transportation of certain elements and the re-editing of the film in a different object is really necessary. So after you could tell me, but what means what kind of necessity, and here maybe we would enter into philosophical discussion. But you know that it's not something just for having a nice sequence, or and often again it's rarer for a filmmaker who did movie. He knows more or less what he did and the editing and so on. So you know he knows probably why. And again, I would mention the early installation by Chantal, and especially Monterey was a first begin. It was really like a beginning, like a re-editing of Hotel Monterey. But when it came to Death, it was really like you would enter into the movie, because many things which even to the film, you know, the rhythm, the sound effect, all that was like deconstructed and installed in all the space of Jeu de Paume. So, you know, in a way, and even in the process, you would walk through the film, because you had different moments, different layers, and you would go deeper and deeper, and you would end in this very, very difficult room with just the sound of, I think it was Alpha. I think it was the verses by Akhmatova. So, you know, it was really, really very specific, and after she never came back to that. It has probably to do with the fact that Death was a very long process. It's a film she was really thinking about. She began to write, she came back to USSR and filmed. And so, you know, it was probably also because she, and when you read part of her notes, she was always interested and sometimes anxious about how you pass from the words, because she was always writing a lot before filming, how you, and she thinks somewhere that for her the most demanding, the most radical expression is writing. Also because, you know, one-to-one, also because you have to concentrate, also because you are on your own and you don't have to deal with a team, with production, big money, and so on and so forth. And this many writers would say that, even so they suffer sometimes on their desk. And probably it has also to do with that. For the necessity is really that not installations for having, you know, images, because frankly, when we would be honest, you have a certain tendency to a proliferation of kind of a visual circus. And I think that it's such, the moment we are living in, it's such a visual circus that, you know, it's, you have places for that, but maybe not exhibition spaces. Or at least it was my position. So not the space, because the filmmaker or not, they have to adapt to the space, and they do, but more the necessity how to decide what kind of elements you would, you know, for Pedro it was rushes. Chantal, they were not rushes, it were images, but it was a very long movie, images from the movie. She decided to edit in a different way, different sequencing of the film and so on and so forth. And the Zieberbug, it was absolutely not from his film, it was from his archive. And it's something, in a way, he does in these movies, but in another way, because in his movies he was working with actors and situations, and in these caverns, because you have different moments, caverns of memory. He dealt more with his personal archive. They're very big books with collage, and it's a very, it's a huge archive. I think he's still working on that. Now, so we might have some surprises when it will be open to the public. So I don't know if my answer was clear.
Any more questions or comments?
Or complaints?
No, so if not, thank you very much, Catherine David, once again. We are now moving directly, we are a little bit beyond schedule, but not that much, so quite good. We are doing quite well, because we still have the opening of the exhibition. So as I've said, it's on the museum just next door to the library of the university. So you go out, and then to your right there, we will have the presentation of the Congo VR work that was presented this morning, and also I think from Expanded Memories, and we'll have a small cocktail, and then we will return here again for the exhibition of Sleepwalk at 8:30, and the questions and answers after that. So once again, thank you very much, Catherine David, and thank you very much to you all. And we'll continue in another venue. Thank you very much. It was very interesting, your historical tour, because it...
No, because, you know, sometimes people don't remember well.